This really does feel like a coming home for me in many respects. I was actually born in Monterey. My father was in the Army here, in the language school. And I spent a lot of time in this theater, actually. My daughter was a thespian, and I spent probably about that seat right there. I watched more shows of Aida than I think I could count. So let's give this another shot here. And of course, being part of this with Jill, with Bill Kirkwood, with Doug Au, is enormously meaningful for me. These are individuals for whom I owe so much, and then particularly, of course, Marcia and Tom Curtin, who gave me the professional opportunities which literally changed my life. I won't go into them now, or I would spend all of my talk talking about those. Instead, what I wanted to talk about just briefly with you here this morning is sort of a changing conception of the ocean, I think, which is occurring here in the early part of the 21st century. I think for most of us, our view of the ocean really has been in effect shaped from the view of a deck of a ship. We've gone to sea in ships, we've lowered things into the deep in wires, we've occasionally gone into the deep in submersibles and Alvin or perhaps on scuba. But for the most part, we've looked at the top of the ocean and put things into the interior and been only occasional visitors to the ocean environment. That's really changing. This is a video here of a vehicle developed by Hanumat Singh. And it's a representative of this new class of systems that we're developing, these autonomous underwater vehicles, these vehicles that are not tethered. Here he's deployed this vehicle in the Antarctic from an Australian icebreaker. And here, by the way, is a robot taking one of my favorite pictures of another robot. So I think photographers need to look out. So. But, you know, and this was doing a very simple task. It was just measuring the thickness of the underside of the ice. Not so easy. This is sea ice. It's drifting, so it had to navigate relative to a drifting ice sheet. And interestingly, it actually found that the ice sheet was a little thicker than the method, the truth method being a bunch of people going around on the surface of the ice and drilling holes. And they realized afterwards, as they went through the data, that if you turn a bunch of people loose on ice with drills and ask them to drill randomly, they pick the thinner spots. So, so the robot found, in fact, that the ice was a little thicker than they expected. Now we do have some experience with rapid change brought on by technology in the ocean environment. And that's, of course, with these teleoperated systems. It was not so long ago that there were very few places on the face of the planet that could really build a deep ocean, a multi-thousand meter remotely operated vehicle. Of course, here's a picture of Jason, which is one of those vehicles. I could easily have put a picture up here of Tiburon, which of course Doug Au and Bill Kirkwood were instrumental in building. But you know, at one time, those were very special vehicles. Today, there's literally hundreds of ROVs in use. Probably Oceaneering alone owns 300 or 400 multi-thousand meter rated remotely operated vehicles. And they're absolutely essential to the enterprise going on in the deep ocean of, in this case, extracting oil. They need them for mapping the site, for preparing the site, for installing the equipment, for inspecting and maintaining the equipment, for decommissioning the equipment. They literally couldn't function out there in the environment without robots. It's part of a bigger trend, I think, in our interaction with the ocean. Oil and gas was out there first in a big way in terms of an industry, but you can see that there are enormous changes coming. And to some degree, these come from the fact that the world is, we hope, becoming wealthier. So this is in effect looking at a demand index for various types of consumables as a function of basically your wealth. So as your income goes up from, and much of the world lives at less than, you know, a few dollars a day, really, income, as your income goes up, what do you ask for? What do you need, and what do you want in your life? Where do you spend your money? Turns out not so much steel, and actually copper, which you might think, you know, as they install electricity, not so much that, and maybe even less than we think, because of course it's quite possible we'll go to very distributed energy systems in the developing world, like they've bypassed landlines and gone straight to cell phones. Maybe they'll bypass large central plants and go straight to solar and wind. Electricity demand, of course, goes up, but really the big ones are food. As you become wealthier, what happens is you want to improve your diet, and in particular you want meat. And so as a consequence, what you're seeing is you're seeing increasing demands on things which are already pretty much tapped out in the terrestrial environment. And as a consequence, we see a host of new ocean industries. So over there on the left, oil and gas, I already talked about that. Winds are roughly twice as high over ocean as they are over land. So of course it's a tremendous place to put wind farms, but that requires an infrastructure to support that, including all of the cables to run that power back to shore. We have deep ocean mining, which oftentimes is driven by as much geopolitical considerations as it is actual sheer demand on resources. In many cases, we have a lot of terrestrial resources. There's telecoms out there. Of course, most of our data goes under the sea, not via satellites. And there's a lot of discussion of using algae as a source of fuel, and one of the great places that you might grow it is, in fact, in the ocean. And then down on the right, there's aquaculture, which right now is pretty low tech, but actually already produces roughly the same amount of fish as wild fisheries. And in the future, that may well be the way that the world feeds itself. So this, in effect, is a sort of a roadmap to industries of the future. Now, these are really enabled, I think, by basically what's going on, what's being developed by the people in this room. Most of you are technologists of one form or another. Even if you're a scientist, you work with technology in a regular basis and probably create new instruments. If you look in the Boston area, this is a map we produced a little while ago. What you can see is these red squares are all robotics companies. And then if you sort of were to draw a line from Boston, which is kind of in the middle of that cluster, down to that blue diamond down there, which is Woods Hole, and then kind of across into Connecticut and back again, you'd actually encompass an awful lot of marine robotics companies. It's an enormous marine robotics industry. This is not the only one, but it's one that I happen to have a map of. And it shows, and a lot of these are startups. An amazing number of these are startups, and they're building vehicles in ways that are very different than we thought of vehicles 15 or 20 years ago. So there's some very exciting days coming. Now, I think that if you look at all of this technology and you ask where does it appear in the ocean environment, again, you can take a look here at the Gulf of Mexico, and you can see the infrastructure that's been installed as a combination of platforms and pipelines. In effect, I kind of refer to this as Suburban Ocean. So the ocean, that we might think of it as an unexplored place, a poorly understood place, but there's parts of the ocean where there's power, there's communications, there's infrastructure. It's like suburbia for a robot. There's a place for them to plug in. And so I think that this part of the ocean actually creates a very different environment for us to build systems for. And it also creates a new set of problems that we need to address. We're asking much more question about how humans impact the environment in a place like this than we are asking about how the pristine environment operates on its own. Now, there has been an awful lot of work, and I couldn't resist playing this. It's an old video, but it was of an experiment in Monterey Bay, and it was really the culmination of a lot of work that Tom Curtin funded. So here we are, Monterey Bay, and on the surface there's our airplane and ship. But if you look at that ocean, in temperature colors, you'd see these upwelling processes. So of course you have these upwelling processes here that bring that nutrient-rich water to the surface and drives a lot of the ecosystem. Strip the top of the ocean away and you can see all these robots underneath. So we've actually gone from a period where getting one robot to work is a big deal to systems where we begin to put multiple robots together to work cooperatively in the ocean environment. And while this is a cartoon, in fact, this field program really occurred back in 2003. And all of these vehicles are they're not just operating on their own and taking this data and we're going to analyze it later. These robots are actually telemeting their data back to shore via Iridium in this case. And as that data goes back to shore, of course, it ends up being distributed to a host of other groups which are modeling the ocean and making predictions about the ocean environment. This is, I think, this is for us in the ocean environment sort of a little bit of a harbinger of the future. Increasingly, it's not one system in the ocean, it's a network of systems in the ocean. And you can see big changes occurring. So these are two vehicles developed up at Monterey. The one in the back was originally intended to be a 1,500 kilometer vehicle with a semi-fuel cell on it. In fact, in that version, it was almost 1.5 times that length. The one in the front actually runs that distance, like 1,800 kilometers, on a regular basis. For all I know, it's in the water now, probably be out at the Monterey display there, and it's a fraction the size. It's a fifth the size. It runs further distance and on regular batteries. And why does it happen? Well, we've gotten a lot better at making vehicles and understanding how to manage power consumption. I will say that communications in the ocean through water communications also is fundamentally changing how we build robotic systems. If you want them to cooperate, they have to be able to talk to each other. And I used to think of that upper left way as the only way to do it, acoustic communications. But increasingly, free space optics is becoming a very important method for us for having vehicles interact with each other. And in fact, it again enables new types of vehicles. And then down in the right is microfibers. Why have that big pipeline in effect, or that giant garden hose or larger connector to the ROV? Why not just do the fiber and put the batteries on the vehicle? Well, it turns out there's a class of vehicles, of course, that do that. This is just showing what you can do with optical comms. Here's Alvin, it's several thousand meters. It's put a camera on the bottom, which is optically communicating back to Alvin the imagery from the camera. So here Alvin is basically taking a selfie. Admittedly, it's a kind of expensive selfie, but it gives you a bit of a God's eye view that you don't get in the ocean environment, right? Most of us know you go down in an ROV or Alvin, you really don't see beyond the lights. You never get a chance to look back at yourself. And this idea that you can now, in effect, have almost infinite comms, it's really about 1 to 10 megabit a second across 100 meters, really changes how you do things. And here's what you do when you have that light fiber. Neirid is actually on its way on a German icebreaker up to the Arctic now, and you begin to go and explore places which you wouldn't have dared go with your classic ROVs, and do manipulative work because you can have a human control it. Now, I think that, when you think of under ice, this is going to be a bit of a reach for you, but there's ice-covered oceans elsewhere, not just here, but in other places in our solar system. And if you look at spacecraft missions, working from Mars there on the left all the way to the outer solar system, what you can see is we visited Mars a lot. Dry, dusty planet. We've sent comparatively few spacecraft to the outer solar system, but surely one of the defining moments of space exploration came in the late 70s when the Voyagers flew through the Jovian system, and we realized that Europa had an ice crust, and then a little while later realized that in fact there's liquid water under that ice crust. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of liquid water. It turns out there's more liquid water in the outer solar system than there is in the inner solar system. There's more water on Europa than there is on Earth. And so as a consequence, I think one of the next great enterprises that, if we were to come back to this meeting 20 years from now, what would people be talking about? Well, there might be a marine technology society, there might be an ocean science discussion, there might be an engineering component associated with explorations on oceans, not on here, but on the icy moons in the outer solar system. So I have one final video I want to share with you, and it really has to do with the element of surprise. We put these vehicles in the ocean, we usually know, we have some idea what we're looking for, we instrument our sensors, and of course we're always looking forward. And Amy Kikulia did something which I think was really quite brilliant. She put a camera on one of her vehicles looking backwards. So here's a camera looking backwards on a Remus vehicle just as it's deployed. So as this vehicle sort of dives off the surface, you can always see there's a fish that's beginning to follow it. And then a few minutes later, you have a whole school following this vehicle. And And I think, this sort of raises all kinds of interesting questions. There is still the element of unexpected, even in the most mundane activities in the ocean. It certainly allows you to make lots of jokes about hindsight. But it also tells us we're not alone. We're still exploring an ocean environment we understand so poorly, and we're building industries there. And I think the group in this room is the group which is going to help us learn to do that responsibly. And for that, I look forward to a fantastic meeting and hearing what all of the new advances and ideas are. So thank you very much.